Joining us now, Levar Stoney, one of the candidates running for mayor. Levar, good to have you.
Good morning, John. How are you?
Good. Education seems to be one of the big issues in Richmond that keeps coming up in all the public surveys. And what a lot of people don't understand is, okay, so if you're mayor, right, you have an independent school board operating, what influence does the mayor have on education for Richmond schools?
Well, John, what I think is the two underused components of the job is this misnomer as a strong mayor. Number one, the mayor can be the individual who drives the agenda, drives the narrative, and drives the culture inside and outside City Hall. The mayor can also be the individual who is the grand convener, who brings people to the table, whether it's the private sector, the nonprofit world, academia, VCU, Virginia Union, U of R, and our city council, our school board, and our superintendent. Now, in my 10-point plan, the only candidate in this race to roll out a 10-point plan on education, I talk about how the mayor can be a champion, an advocate, and a partner when it comes to public education. And I talk about how the mayor can be the person who brings the city council, the school board, and the superintendent to the table to actually sign off on what I call an education compact, lays out where Richmond City schools are going over the next 5 to 10 years. Shared goals, shared outcomes, and shared strategies, so we can stop this infighting that we see every single year annually. And that's where the mayor comes in. When people say the mayor doesn't have a role, you look at the cities that are taking off, and the mayor is playing a strong part in their renaissance. And that's what I'm going to do as the next mayor of the city.
So, Levar, what is driving, in your opinion, Richmond schools are failing? No question about it. That's why it's a key issue in your campaign. And many people in the Richmond School City District that don't have the resources to go to another school or get out of their area or go to a private school, they're basically trapped in a failing school system. What's driving the failure?
Well, you know what? When you are in an urban setting like Richmond, we have 40% of the children who live under the poverty line. Now, to me, poverty isn't destiny. As you know, I'm the first in my family to graduate from high school, to go to college, and graduate from college. And I think there is a particular role that the city can play in improving the quality of life of a child. And I've laid that out in my 10-point plan. Particularly, I talk about after-school programs for every single child in the Richmond City schools, that keeps children out of trouble. There we can provide them high enrichment. We can provide them recreational opportunities after school, but also we can provide them a meal. Many of our children, unfortunately, John, when they leave school at 1:30, 2 o'clock, what time you name it, the last meal they have all day is that lunch at 11:30, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. We can at least give them a meal, and when they enter school doors the next day, they can actually be ready to learn. As the First Lady and the Governor say, how can you be hungry for knowledge when you're just plain hungry? And so I think the mayor can play a role in wrapping around services, whether it's Parks and Rec or social service, around each and every child that goes through those doors in Richmond Public Schools. Allow the educator to do what they do well, educate. And now the teacher doesn't have to wear all the different hats. They don't have to be a psychologist. They don't have to be mom and dad and all that. Let the teacher do what they do well, and that's teach.
Okay, so let's get to the opportunity for additional charter schools. How do you stand on that and why?
Hey, I'm obviously open to anything that will allow for us to close the achievement gap in Richmond Public Schools. However, I will say the current laws on the book allow for great leeway for our school system to be a whole lot more creative than what we've already done. And you look at what places like Newport News is doing, and I've visited many times and shaken every single hand that walked through those doors in an achievable dream in Newport News. We can do the same here in Richmond, but no one is going to invest. The private sector, the philanthropic world, is not going to invest in a school system where every single year the school board and the city council are at each other's throats. And the mayor is also not a champion and an advocate and a partner. No one's going to invest in that. And so I'm going to be the person who leads the charge. Yes, I fully understand that the mayor is not in charge of school policy or school curriculum. But there's no way that I'm going to sit on my hands and allow Richmond students to fail, to be shortchanged. I want them to create that ladder to success and that foundation for opportunity.
All right, so basically, Levar, what you're saying is you're going to use the bully, if I understand what you're saying, you're going to use the bully pulpit of the mayor's position in order to get things improved in the schools, and you're calling for an increase in funding for basically school lunches, school breakfast, just an increase in funding to feed kids that are underprivileged. Everybody's for that, right? Nobody wants anybody to go hungry in this country, but where are you going to get that money for that?
No, John, I think you're picking out specifics. So I don't know whether or not you've gone to StoneyForRVA.com and looked at my education plan on how I transform city schools here in Richmond. But you should take a long look at that. I lay out a 10-point plan on what I want to do. It's not about just feeding children after school. It talks about how we retain teachers. We train teachers. They're in our schools for 5 to 10 years, and then after 5 or 10 years, they end up in the county systems. And that's like drafting a player in an NFL, developing them, and let them go on free agency to another team. And I'm tired of seeing that. Mm-hmm. Once they leave, they have Henrico and Chesterfield have great teachers, but a lot of them got their starts in Richmond. Mm-hmm. We can't allow that anymore. We have to recruit the brightest and most talented principals as well. Mm-hmm. The whole plan that I laid out, the 10-point plan, talks about all of this. Mm-hmm. The only candidate in the race to do so. Now, this is the number one issue that you said in this race, yet not one candidate has laid out a plan on how to improve the quality of life of children in this city. And when people go to the polls on November 8th, they need to remember that.
How do you differentiate your education plan from the front runner in the race right now, Joe Morrissey?
He has none. Well, what plan is there to differentiate from? He has none.
So what would you tell voters, according to the CNU poll that came out that shows that education is their number one concern? You're saying that Morrissey has no education improvement plan whatsoever. What would you tell?
The choice is very clear, John. The choice is very clear. There's one person with a plan. There's another person with no plan. Stark. Crystal clear.
Now, in the same poll that came out, it showed Morrissey as a clear front runner, showed you at 7%, although you've outraised everybody by a substantial margin, Levar, something like 15 or 20 to 1. Why no numbers with all that money?
I think the poll showed that people know who Joe Morrissey is, for good or for bad. And people don't know who Levar Stoney is. And guess what? People are starting to get to know who Levar Stoney is. This past Saturday, I was up on Churchill, at the Churchill reunion, met a number of people, but one woman stood out to me who was carrying a Joe Morrissey sign under her arm. And I told her who I was and what my plan was for public education and transforming City Hall here in Richmond. And guess what? She tossed that sign and took a Levar Stoney brochure and said she was going to vote for me. Yesterday, I was knocking on doors in the north side, and I went to 5 homes. All had Joe Morrissey signs. They had seen me on the TV. They had heard about my plan to transform Richmond Public Schools. And guess what? They took their signs down personally and put a Levar Stoney for mayor sign in their lawn.
All right. Sounds like you're out there working, making some waves.
Hey, you know what, John? I think people forget to recognize is that I've knocked on over 20,000 doors in this campaign. Yes, I've actually built the resources to actually compete in November and compete in October. But what people forget is I've been knocking on doors since I got in this race in April. Over 20,000 doors we've knocked on.
All right, Levar,
we're running a competitive race.
I'm out of time. I want to thank Levar Stoney for being with us. Hey, more information, go to StoneyForVA.com, StoneyForVA.com. Levar, thanks for being with us.